Yeah, kind of through a back door. This might sound like a really terrible story. So there's two parts to the story, right? One was coming back to school, pursuing a PhD. Um, and there were two parts to that, right? So I was pastoring again in a Chinese church, right? And they take ordination very, very seriously in Chinese Baptist churches. And so they don't ordain somebody before they begin serving, right? You need to prove yourself in ministry, prove your faithfulness to the Lord and to your congregation. And so it wasn't until I had been at the church for 5 years that they initiated ordination process. And they take the process very seriously. So I had to write a very thorough ordination paper outlining my understanding of various theological disciplines and also my philosophy of ministry. Well, I've always had a problem with talking too much, whether it's verbally or in writing. And so it ended up being 95 pages. And I absolutely loved the process of working through it. My ordination council included several of my mentors, some of my seminary professors, and others. And in response, I had 3 of them individually and separately come up to me after the ordination process and say, you really need to think about going back to school and pursuing a PhD. You have a gift for writing, you have a gift for teaching, and you really need to see whether this is something the Lord would guide you into. One of them, in the context of doing so, tied it explicitly to the Canadian theological scene. And so one of the things that we need in Canada is Canadian-born, Canadian-trained theologians and philosophers who have a commitment to the Lord and a commitment to theological education. He says, we have schools that are going to die unless people like you, he says, will take up the mantle and pursue PhDs and teach. And so those 3 comments stuck in the back of my mind. And so eventually the Lord just gradually drew me back in. I told my wife I thought she'd say, there's no way we can go back to school and do a PhD. That'll be in there, but we have 3 young kids. Not going to work, right? Just impractical. Much to my surprise, she thought it was an exciting prospect. And so, okay, the voice of the Lord is speaking through my wife now to me as well. And so I went to one of my, I'm a historical Jesus guy. I'm just a Jesus geek at heart, right? And so my original intention was to do New Testament studies, historical Jesus work. And I went to one of my seminary profs and kind of shared with him my thinking and leanings, and he said, I fully affirm your gifting and your calling and direction to go back to school. He says, but is there anything else that you love equally to New Testament studies? And I'm like, yeah, I really love apologetics and worldview. And he says, do that instead. And I'm like, what, you think I suck at New Testament? He's like, no, it's not that. He said, just, given the landscape, New Testament PhDs, he said, are a dime a dozen. And so doing something different, right? If you can do world religions, you can do ethics, you can do philosophy, you can do apologetics, he said you're going to have much higher likelihood of being able to find a job after you're finished. So I took that advice. I was equally passionate about worldview and philosophy and apologetics. And so that's what pointed me back in that direction.